In English, fluent speaking has three main components that you can work on: linking, contracting, and reducing for fluent speaking. Let's take a look at what contractions are. Basically, contractions just means if I take two words and I make them into one word. We often do this in fluent speaking. We'll talk about when we use it, but it's very basic. Two words become one. When do we use them? This is interesting. We use them almost all of the time. We rarely say two words when we can say one. So I'm going to say all of the time is when we use them, except when we want to stress one of those two words. So what I want you to think about is maximizing your fluency by using contractions whenever you can. How we use them, I want to go into that in a few moments after we talk about what they are and also why to use them. So let's take a look at the main contractions that we do. I want to talk about 5 types of contractions you can use. As soon as you see this, you may feel overwhelmed. And I don't want you to be overwhelmed by this topic, but I do want you to be aware of what the 5 main areas for using contractions are. And so in order to do that, we're going to cover it and break those down for you. So we use contractions with pronouns plus verbs. So the pronouns I, you, he, she, it, we, they, and that can get combined together with the verb to become one word rather than two. When we use them is when we're using these verbs as helping verbs. So if I'm just saying I am and he is, I'm not necessarily going to contract those because we can't just say I'm and have it be a full sentence. So when you're only saying the two words, you don't contract them. The rest of the time, these verbs typically are supporting another verb. So usually I'm using I am running, I am teaching, I am talking, and I'm not going to use those two words. I'm going to contract it to I'm. So I'm going, I'm talking, I'm working, I'm listening, I'm learning, etc. That's because the am is the unimportant helping verb, and so it's easy and useful to contract it. So we do that with the verbs for, to be. We also do that with will. So rather than I will help, I'll help. Rather than she will go, she'll go. We also use it with both would and had. I've listed them together here because they both contract the same way. The context is going to tell you if I'm saying I would or I had. For example, he'd been busy over that time period means he had been busy. He'd like to means he would like to. So part of the challenge people face when they're trying to use contractions is that when you're learning the grammar of English, you need to know he would like or he had been to get that grammar correct. Then moving to the next step and changing to he'd for both of those can really be tricky for people. So starting to associate the full version with the two words and the contracted version together and noticing where you're still using the full version is one of the techniques that I'll teach you how to use to begin to implement contractions. Another factor is how we actually pronounce these, and so that's something we'll talk about when we get to how to use them as well, because many times people can read and understand and listen and hear what these contractions mean, but looking at something like it'll and knowing that that's pronounced the same as middle without the M, it'll, isn't straightforward, isn't clear, and often isn't taught. So many times when you're learning English, you learn the full form to understand the grammar and the verb forms, and then you don't get the opportunity to practice using these contracted forms. So a lot of my videos and resources are going to walk you through breaking these patterns down for the different verbs and the different pronouns, learning how to pronounce them and implement them, and why you should do that. Okay, we also contract the verb to have, which I also wrote here as has because when we're talking about he has or it has, it's the same verb, but it takes two different forms. So it's either going to be have or has, depending on what pronoun you're using. And then we have a column here for negative contraction. We rarely say the word not with these particular verbs. I almost never say I should not. I just say I shouldn't. We'll go through and talk about as we choose and decide which contractions to start with and how to do that. We'll go through is not, are not, becoming isn't, aren't, wasn't, etc. These resources, charts like this, are available on my website, and we go through many of these contractions in our Reduced Sounds and Linking playlist, as well as in our Real Talk course on speechmodification.com. Not shown here on this chart, but also important, we often contract with who, what, where, when, why, and how across the same verbs. So instead of who will, I'll probably say who'll. Where did becomes where'd you go? Where did you go? Where'd you go? I also include these and those, which are not grammatically written as contractions, but you'll notice in speech, rather than these will be okay, I'll say these'll be okay. So technically we contract for that, these, those, and it, as well as the personal pronouns, and a lot of our videos talk about that as well. So when it comes to how to use contractions, I feel like implementing this is a multi-part series. First of all, you need to identify which contractions you're already using and which ones you don't use. And going back to my chart here, I forgot to mention my color coding. You see there's a couple of these that are in red. These contractions that are in red are contractions that we typically don't write, especially itted and thatted, but we do say them. And these are, I would say, a good place to start, in that many people who are non-native speakers are not aware of these contractions and don't tend to use them. They tend to say it had or it would rather than itted. So that is one place you can consider starting. Looking at another good place to start is with the contractions with the pronoun I, because you have lots of opportunities to practice those when you're by yourself, when you're talking about yourself. I'm going to practice that. I'll need to figure out how to practice. I'd like to implement these. I've been trying to get more fluent as I'm speaking. That's a good place to start, kind of working your way across. Or for many people, they realize, yeah, I use I'm and it's and she's pretty regularly, but I don't really use you'll and she'll. I tend to say you will, she will. So if you can look at this and find contractions that feel natural to already use and ones that you recognize you don't yet use, that's a great place to start. Also, for many people, using the negative, the not contractions is an important place to start, because you don't currently use them. And if you say, I do not use them, it sounds very formal, very stiff, and actually the meaning changes a little bit. So we'll get into that when we talk about why to use contractions. So places I would start: here, here, or here, or any place that you find a contraction that you know you're not currently using. How to actually practice and implement? Number one, you have to choose one or two. Don't try to do that whole chart of contractions at once, because it'll be overwhelming. You'll have difficulty implementing it. It'll be unlikely to be successful. But once you've chosen one or two that you recognize, okay, I don't use these, I want to start trying to use them, you can build some short phrases with them. So for example, say you don't typically use it'll. First of all, learn how it's actually pronounced. So it has the flap T in there, just like middle. And then we can do some repeated phrases with it. For example, I'm going to just practice it'll be, and then try to fill in some of my own words. So it'll be good, it'll be busy, it'll be rainy, it'll be okay, it'll be great. I'm trying to come up with natural phrases that go together with it will be, move it to it'll be, and really associate that meaning in my mind and think about how I would naturally use it. So I'm practicing getting the motor practice as well as pairing that meaning of it will be, saying it as it'll be instead. Often, one of the roadblocks for contractions, besides knowing how to pronounce them and what they are, is feeling confident in the grammar of them. If I'm saying it would have been good if, there's a lot going on grammatically there, and if I learned it as it would have been good if, my brain is not necessarily going to be comfortable with it would have been. but this is how we tend to say it. We contract would have to would have been. Again, rewriting that as would have so that you get the pronunciation, and then pairing it with been, would have been good, would have been nice, would have been better if, etc. So that I'm getting a lot of practice and I feel confident that I'm getting the grammar correct and the meaning correct. Even though it's not that complex, we tend to have these patterns of stored grammar and meaning that go with the words that we originally learned. Okay, now why use contractions? As I mentioned before, particularly with not contractions, but really with any of those big list of contractions, if I use two words, it's going to sound less fluent, it's going to sound more stiff and more formal, and it may change the meaning because those little words like am and will and have are not important. They're usually unstressed. And if I say, I am going, first of all, that sounds a little bit less fluent. But secondly, the way a native speaker would use that is to say, I am going. They typically only would say the full word am if they were stressing on it. And then there's kind of an implied, hidden, no, I am going. It's a little bit argumentative, or it's defending or responding. I don't use that if I say I am going. If I'm just saying, oh, I'm going to the store, I'm going shopping, I'm going out. It's much more natural and fluent to use I'm there. And the meaning changes a little bit sometimes if I say I am going. This is also particularly true for using the not contractions. If I say I do not, that's really reserved for a stronger than usual statement. I do not, rather than I don't. I don't think so. I don't believe that. That sounds regular, natural. It's the main meaning that we use. I do not believe that is giving a lot of extra stress on do and not, and it's very emphatic. I do not believe that's okay. If you're just trying to respond, do you like that? I do not. It sounds intense, a lot more intense than I don't like it. So with these negative don't, won't, can't, couldn't, shouldn't contractions, if you're not using them, it's going to sound more intense. And you might notice that you get kind of a strong reaction when really you're just responding to someone's question or you're just using that negative. So that's a main reason why I highly recommend that as one of the starting places, determining which negative contractions you're using and you aren't, because it will sound different to native speakers and your meaning might change a little bit and you might be misunderstood, or it might be overemphasizing the negative, whereas the contraction is just the normal way of doing it. Okay, so contractions are a really big topic. I can direct you to resources for getting started. A lot of my podcast videos are shadowing and practice videos to get comfortable using contractions. And as I mentioned, a lot of the Real Talk videos and our Real Talk course focuses on contractions, as well as our linking and reductions and how we sound like native speakers. Next week, we'll talk about reductions, and then probably the following week, we'll do a recap and summary of linking, contractions, and reductions, some of the biggest elements for fluent speaking in English. Thank you so much, everyone, for being a part of class today. And leave me any follow-up questions you have that we didn't get to today in a comment. I'll be happy to answer those for you in a reply and give you resources here on the channel and also on our website, speechmodification.com. Thanks so much to all of my channel members. There's a growing number of you, and I really appreciate your support, and I hope you're enjoying the extra materials available to channel members here on the channel. If you haven't yet subscribed or joined, check that out as an option. It's a great way to show your support. And thanks so much for being here in class. That's the best way, is to watch my videos, to show up for class, and to comment, share, and like. It really helps the channel to grow. Thanks for a wonderful class today, and I hope you have a great weekend. I look forward to seeing you on Tuesday when we drop a new video, as well as next Saturday in our live class. Remember, if you want to sound like a native speaker, you can do it. speechmodification.com. Bye, everyone. Thanks for a great class.